Thanks to everyone for coming. It's nice to see such a large audience. I'm not going to speak for too long, but so hopefully you're roughly familiar with the Chartist movement. But if you don't, then I'll just basically say the probably the largest working class movement for democracy in the 19th century. They had branches all across Britain. Their main purpose was fighting for universal suffrage, that is, getting the vote for all men, and because the electorate was very small and essentially confined to just aristocrats, and they were campaigning for one man, one vote. Basically, we're not quite at the era of female suffrage yet, but women did take part in Chartist meetings and did have their own Chartist branches. So that's my sort of historical interest, and why I think it's still important to look at the movement today is that it is the kind of foundation of why Britain has a democracy today, is that these campaigners in the 1840s were campaigning for it on a huge scale, actually. So today we're focusing on branch meetings where the committed activists would meet every week, but they also had huge meetings which Ian will talk about later, called monster meetings, which are the origin of the modern demonstration as well. So hugely important in British history. I think, you know, if you don't know about them, you should do, because they're brilliant. So the project that Mahendra's just outlined is called Political Meetings Mapper. The website is still under construction. I was hoping to unveil it today, but it's still a bit rough and ready, so I thought we'll wait. So it will be unveiled in November, so that's when all of this data will be available and you'll be able to search through it. So I'm going to show you some screenshots. I'm afraid they're not going to be that interactive, but we'll get there. So if you want to know more about Chartism, the British Library themselves have quite a good education section on Chartism. Do go and read it if you want to learn more. And there's also Chartist.net, which is set up by a man called Mark Crail, who is a very comprehensive site. Its tagline is, "Was your ancestor a Chartist?" So you can look up names and addresses on that as well. One hopes that everyone had a Chartist ancestor. And also, I better mention, actually, at this moment, right now, Gwent Archives, in collaboration with the National Library of Wales, are doing a Wikipedia editathon of all the entries about Welsh Chartism. So if you get bored in the talks, or you don't want to go on the walk, please log into Wikipedia and start editing some of the Welsh Chartist entries. They're focusing on the Newport Rising of 1839 because that's the pinnacle event of Welsh Chartism. But so they send their apologies they can't be here today, but they're all in Gwent Archives at the moment, tapping away, trying to make the Wikipedia entries more accurate. But again, that shows that there's a growing interest in Chartism as a movement and what we can do with it in terms of digital resources and getting the message out to the public, really. So the link's up there. Again, Mahendra can send you these slides if you want all the information. But the Chartists basically campaigned for the 6 points, which included universal suffrage. They also included the secret ballots, which is, so before 1867, people knew who you voted for, and therefore that could be you could be bribed or coerced to vote in a particular way. They also wanted annual elections, which is the only point that hasn't been achieved. I think we might want annual elections. I'm quite tired because I foolishly went onto Twitter last night and saw all the kerfuffle about a pig, and so that was sort of a Twitter storm about something or nothing. But and they also wanted payment of MPs, because they wanted working class people to go into Parliament. Obviously, most MPs at the time were aristocrats or very wealthy middle class people who could afford to not work and stand in Parliament. But you can read all about it yourself. So I'll better tell you about the project, which is about, I've been using the Northern Star newspaper. So the Northern Star newspaper is the main Chartist newspaper. There were other significant ones, but this was the one that had the biggest reach. And I also chose it because it has a particular column in it which specifies what meetings were going to happen. And so that was actually quite easy to identify digitally as a regular event. So I could quite quickly text mine the data from it. So I didn't have to search through a lot of prose. It's all there. The name of the place is in capitals, so I could quite quickly identify that as a place, and then using a gazetteer translate that into a geocoded place. So I'd put the latitude and longitude on the place. So what we did is we ran the Northern Star through an OCR program, so an optical character recognition program. I thought we were going to have to crowdsource the transcription, because Bob Nicholson, who you saw did the Victorian humour one, that's what he did. He got his students to basically type out by hand the newspaper editorials and so forth. When we ran this through the system, actually it was pretty accurate. We were getting up to about 80% accuracy, which is enough when you know that the first words are going to be a place and it follows the same formula. So I didn't need to get anyone to transcribe it, which made the project a lot quicker. So I got wonderful help from Samantha in the corner to check all the OCR, and that's what she's been doing excellently. So I only needed a couple of student volunteers just to double check and correct any typos that the OCR had missed. So that's why we use the Northern Star, because it had that regular format. And as I'll show you in the maps, it covers most of Britain. It's weaker on Scotland and Wales and Ireland, but the Northern Star was published in Leeds, but it has quite a lot of information even on London Chartism, because they had a reporter in London. So I'm pretty confident that we're getting a lot of the meetings recorded. And then it comes out in a CSV file like that. I've sorted out the spacing now. But, so that's what I input into the website that we're doing. It's you'll get the full text of the meeting, and then it'll geocode it to the place, and it'll be plotted on a historic map. And we've also developed some code to date it as well. So automatically it'll tell you what date it is. So when the text says tomorrow or on Monday or next Wednesday, it comes up with the right date, which is very handy. We're still developing natural language processing to try and work out the longer series of terms like forthcoming Wednesday the 18th. We still haven't worked out how to do that yet, but it's getting there. So I'm hoping this tool will be available for doing any, it doesn't have to be Chartist meetings, it could be any newspaper to date the reports, which I think is a very handy tool. So this is a sneak preview of what the website will look like. It probably will change colour and things like that. But the first page will be a map of England. We've overlaid the National Library of Scotland's first edition OS map of Britain on there, just for now. And we're also going to be using some of the British Library maps as well to layer on there. And you'll be able to search. At the moment it's searched by place. I don't know if that's handy. I would like to get some feedback from you, what you think could be useful. There will also, I'll show you, be a timeline and things like that, but at the moment that's how it's organised, that you can search it by place and see what places are coming up. And so initial findings, so far we've done all the meetings for 1841 to 44, which is, apart from 1842, is the years around 1842 before and after are seen as a bit of downtime for Chartists. What we find is actually it's pretty much constant all the way through. We've got about 5,000 meetings so far. And they're kind of concentrated in those sorts of areas. So I think this is also reflective that where the Northern Star have got reporters and which delegates are sending in material, but that's pretty much what I'd expected to get. So you've got the concentration in Manchester and Leeds and the West Riding and Lancashire, as you'd expect, which is the big industrial centres where we know that Chartism was quite strong. We've also got a huge lot of meetings in London, and that's the thing that surprised me, because from my reading of Chartism, as you can tell, I'm not a London historian, I'm a Northern historian. So I didn't know much about London history till I started this project, which has, again, opened a new door of research to me. But I got the impression that London Chartism was quite, not weak, but quite low-key. Actually, we're finding lots and lots of meetings in London, very strong branches all over, as I'll show. So that's the sort of concentrations of meetings in the data. There's a bit in the West Country, a bit in around Newcastle, Sunderland area, as you'd expect. There's less of records, there's fewer records for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, but again I think that's because we're just using one newspaper for the data, so I'd have to do the same exercise with other newspapers that are favourable to Chartism for that. Any questions so far? Okay, so we're doing a timeline again. That's what it looks like at the moment, but it's a bit of a mess because again we're getting about 20-30 meetings per week, so it just looks like a jumble on the generic timeline. So once I've sorted out the computer program, then I'll try and work out a much more amenable way of doing a timeline of when all the meetings happen. I might sort it by indoor and outdoor. As you'd expect, outdoor meetings happen in summer, even though it does rain a lot. And we'll hear more about Kennington Common, but there's always the big moorland meetings as well, the big monster meetings on the moors. But generally, most of the meetings in this data are in indoor ones that happen in pubs and so forth. We also have lecture tours in the data, which again is really useful. Jeanette Martin recently did a PhD on lecture tours in the West Riding of Yorkshire, but so far I think that's the only research that's been done on that. So Chartist employed lecturers to go around the towns basically proselytising missionary work to try and encourage people to form their own Chartist branches. And those lecture tours are advertised in the newspapers because obviously people want to know where the lecture is going to be. So we started to plot those as well. So that will also be on the website, all the lecture tours that are advertised. So there you've got all the different lecturers. That's only 6 lectures I've plotted so far. I don't know who Anne Hater of Oppression was. But again, hopefully once that will be populated, we'll see some interesting geographic patterns. Particularly, I think, as a research question, what happens when Chartists send out their lecturers to places that don't have branches? So they're doing it deliberately to try and form branches of Chartism. So I know Steve Poole has done work on the West Country and looked at where Chartist lecturers go in around Bristol and the West Country and seen are they successful or not. My own work, I've looked quite a bit at the North and East Ridings of Yorkshire, which are traditionally quite politically apathetic. And again, you do get conscious efforts of these Chartist lecturers to go there and try and set up branches. My own research suggests that they're not successful for various reasons, but it'd be interesting to plot how many times they go there and how many times they try and make people join the Chartist movement. Yeah.
Katrina, are you going to integrate that with the growth of the railways as well, presumably?
Could do, yeah.
Well, sorry, it's just a thought, because that obviously made a huge difference.
Yeah.
You think of like Dickens, who was able to go around giving his reading talk. It's been much harder with to get so much done.
Yeah, I can see if we can try and put some railway maps on there. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, this all links back. There's very old research on the relationship between improving communications and political movements. So I'm thinking of Andrew Charles's work on how movements spread once the roads get better as well. So there's lots of possibilities with this sort of stuff. But this will be, sorry it's not available today, but you will get hold of all this stuff and it'll be freely available. So London is our focus today. As I said, when I started this project, I didn't really know anything about London at all. I do have a book coming out. I might as well use this opportunity to plug it. But it's out in December, my new book, but it's only on Northern England because that's my expertise. It's ludicrously priced, so you don't buy it. But so my knowledge of London Chartism is still quite based on the Northern Star and my secondary reading. So I won't pretend to be an expert, but this is what I've come so far to find out. I've got about 125 and rising venues in London that have come up in the Northern Star data, which is a huge amount, I think. and so that's how it's divided. So half of them are pubs, quite a lot of coffee houses. There was quite a strong temperance Chartist movement in London, so they meet in Chartist in coffee houses or in temperance halls that get built. So there's some open spaces. Those are Kennington Common, Lincoln's Inn Fields they use, and outside Paddington Station is another place where they seem to hold a lot of meetings. There's probably more than I know. Yeah. Those are the ones that came up in the data. 5 theatres. I can't remember which ones those are. There's a Victoria, but that could be anywhere. And then 2 other ones that I haven't classified. I'm interested in these buildings that they build themselves or get other groups to build. So they increasingly throughout this period they start building their own buildings. The Chartists, along with the Owenite Socialists and a couple of other groups, are the ones that have the longevity and the financial capability to be able to build their own buildings. So by penny subscriptions and shares and kindly investments by the middle classes, and they start building their own halls. And that's partly my bigger interest in research is restrictions on where and when democratic movements can meet. And it's a big hot topic at the moment in terms of legislation and generally people not liking protests in public areas. And so it links to a whole debate about the privatisation of public space. And that's exactly what happened 200 years ago, that the local authorities would ban meetings, or they'd put pressure on publicans to that they'd revoke the licences if they held these Chartist meetings, however peaceful or not they were. So the Chartists decided to get round this, and the Owenite Socialists, by building their own buildings. So the Owenite Socialists built halls of science, which are kind of mini universities, but the Chartists also borrowed them or rented rooms in the halls of science. So there were 3 halls of science in London. One was on Blackfriars Bridge, Blackfriars Road. They also borrowed working men's clubs, things like that. Also, they built political and scientific institutes, which are quite similar to the Owenite halls of science. So you've got the whole list on your handout. And again, this will all be on the website as well. So the one with the pins is the locations of all of them, and you've got the basically Excel table of all the locations. So that's all there for you to have a look at another time. I've also got on that handout extracts where I've got the Northern Star listing all the different branches, so that might be of use if you're that way inclined. And you'll see that on this page, that's from April 1842. That's the presentation of the second national petition. So if you don't know, the Chartists presented these huge petitions to Parliament for the vote. The second one was in 1842, and they basically had a big demonstration to present it to Parliament. And there's the list of divisions. There's a Western division, which is what we're in now. So we're in the St Pancras branch. And then there's a Northern and Central, Eastern and Southern. So it covered the whole of London. So there's the list of divisions. There's also a couple of other articles if you're interested in the exact addresses of where some of the Chartist organisers lived, particularly printers and things like that. Then that's all there. You can map that yourself. I haven't done those yet, if you want to. Okay, so quickly then, what's also interested me is the use of these venues over time. So Ian Newman has done a blog on the London Corresponding Society meetings. So the London Corresponding Society were perhaps one of the first working class, I use that slightly cautiously, societies in London who campaigned for the vote in the 1790s in response to the French Revolution. And he's plotted all their locations on his blog. And I was looking at, well, which ones still survive and which ones are the same as our Chartist meetings. I've only found 2 at the moment, but I think that might increase, one of which is the pub we're going to end up today in. So the Red Lion was used by the London Corresponding Society as well as the Chartist. So there's a 50-year gap between them. I don't know enough about the publicans to know why they were so sympathetic to these meetings. You know, we're in pretty much central London, west-ish London. And the Crown and Anchor is obviously a very famous location for lots of different political groups. The London Corresponding Society used them, and so did the Chartists. So I'm sure I'll find more, but there is a long history of these sorts of meetings in London. So there's continuities there. That's what the map of London looks like. Again, I thought that the Chartists would mainly be concentrated in the East End, but actually no, they're all over the place. So I've been messing around with Google Earth, and also Harwood's map, Matthew will talk about in a minute. So I was just plotting them. That's what they look like on a Google Earth mashup with Harwood's map. So for example, there's a Charter coffee house there near Westminster Abbey. And that's what the concentration of them looks like. So there's quite a lot in the area that we're going to be walking in today, in Soho, but there's quite a lot also in the Whitechapel area. There's a lot in East London, as you expect. Quite a lot in south of the river as well. What I'm interested, I live in Croydon, so I'm quite interested that Croydon was classed as a London, part of the London divisions, because you would have thought it would have been very much Surrey, and that the London connection would have only come in 1974 or whenever it was. But Croydon's not quite on that map, but the Rising Sun, which is now Morrison's, I think, it was their pub. So quickly that's what I've already showed you. So that's some of the pubs that were involved in the National Petition divisions. The area that we'll be going through today was very much a tailor's area. So one of the interesting things about London Chartism is that it's very much organised by the trades, and that's quite unusual. I found that in Manchester, less so in other cities where Chartism had different routes. So the area that we're going through, a lot of the places we'll see were tailors' ports of call for their meetings. So there's a great sort of trades and artisanal trades basis to Chartism. So the Western Division is dominated by tailors. We've also got carpenters in this area, in St Pancras, shoemakers in Marylebone. So that's a quite distinctive thing, I think, about London Charters, certainly in this early 1840s period, is how it's organised. So you'll see a lot of the Chartist branches are named after the trade who seem to predominate in them. And that's why they're, I think, quite heavily organised, because they've already got that kind of basis to work from. I also sort of tried to mop them on Booth's map, again, completely anachronistically. So this is Booth's poverty map of the 1890s, I think this edition's from. So I was trying to look at whether there was any correlation between Chartist sites and poverty. So Booth mapped areas of poverty in London and marked them in black, and the red areas are the kind of richer areas. But it's mixed. I mean, there is a concentration of areas that are in poor, but then obviously Chartists also met in pubs on quite rich streets. So again, that was just a bit of speculation, and see, I can't really make any conclusions about that map. I don't know why that's happened like that, but there you go. Okay, I don't know if that video will work. Let's see if it does. So this is the route we're going to be taking. If that works. I won't show you all of this, but this was me messing around on Google Earth. But this is mapped on Harwood's map, so it's a bit, there's a lot of empty space where there wasn't by the 1840s. So we're going to be going parallel to Euston Road. We'll take some of the back roads so they're not too busy, and then we'll go to Warren Street. So if you think that that bit of the route's a bit too long, you're welcome to get the tube to Warren Street and meet us there. And then we're going to be heading towards Soho Square. There's a couple of venues there. So the other thing in your packs, this one with the routes. Again, the route's not entirely accurate, but don't follow it completely because you'll get lost. But each site has got some information and some reports about it, which we'll have a look at in each site. And we end at the Red Lion, which is kind of the back of Hamleys, is where we're ending up. So the nearest tube for getting back is Oxford Circus. But if you don't want to do all the walk, you're perfectly happy to come meet us later in the Red Lion if it's raining too much or it's too far.
How do you get there for 5:30?
Yeah, 5:30. So it's up to you, completely up to you. I think that's the end of my talk, really. So that's just an insight into my project and where I'm at. It's still work in progress, but you see there's lots of possibilities that I'm doing with the digital data. I'm really grateful to British Library Labs for giving me the opportunity to play around with the digital data and teach me some coding, which I'm struggling with, but I'm getting there. And they've been really helpful and supportive in that. So I hope that you enjoy the rest of the day and get a bit more insight into why we're doing what we're doing.